Welcome, everybody. I'm Maya Segura, a board member of the Windham World Affairs Council, and I will be moderating our event today. My fellow board member, Claire Gillis, will be handling the technical side of this talk. Claire, would you like to say hello?
Hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on what's turned into a really fantastic weather Sunday up here in Southern Vermont. And yeah, we're just delighted to host Arthur.
Yeah. And we are absolutely pleased to welcome author and Marlboro College alumnus, Arthur Magida. And award-winning journalist, Arthur's books include The Nazi Seance, The Rabbi and the Hitman, and Prophet of Rage. Formerly a professor at Georgetown University and the University of Baltimore, he's been a senior editor at the Baltimore Jewish Times, a consultant for several PBS documentaries, and to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. He's been a contributing correspondent to Religion and Ethics Weekly on Newsweekly on PBS, editorial director of Jewish Lights Publishing, and environmental reporter for the National Journal. His writing has appeared in Newsweek, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, the Houston Chronicle, the Baltimore Sun, Travel and Leisure, the Jerusalem Report, Tikkun, Boston Globe, Geo Islands, and Historic Preservation magazines. He also has master's degrees in history from Georgetown and in clinical psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology. He currently resides in Baltimore. He's with us today to discuss his recent Pulitzer Prize-nominated work, Codename Madeleine, a Sufi Spy in Nazi-occupied Paris, the biography of Noor Inayat Khan, a woman of courage, faith, and adherence to truth, qualities that are much needed in our own turbulent age. Incidentally, the music that you may have heard in the background was written by young Noor in memory of her deceased father, the Sufi master Hazayat Inayat Khan. I want to give a shout out to everyone's books here in Brattleboro for generously offering a discount for the book in advance of this event. If you have not yet purchased the book, I strongly recommend that you do it. It is packed with so much action. It's a great read, I think, for just about anybody who appreciates action and certainly history. A quick word about our next event. In honor of Women's History Month in January, on Sunday, January 17th, 4 panelists will speak about the intersectionality of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, examining how this impacts vulnerable groups differently and how patterns of social injustice, marginalization, discrimination, and cultural bias shape violence. We're happy to announce that Marlboro College alumna, filmmaker of Sisters Rising, a recent award-winning documentary, and Windham County resident Willow O'Farrell will be among the panelists joining us for this talk. Like all of our events, these lectures are free and open to the public. We are the smallest member of the National World Affairs Councils of America, and we are run entirely by volunteers. Annual memberships support our operating costs. If you're interested in becoming a member, and we hope that you would be, you can find further information on our website. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. The talk will be followed by a Q&A. We are currently recording, and the video will be available on YouTube after the event. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask your questions, and please do not use the chat function. When you post your questions, feel free to include your name and where you're writing from so we know with whom we're speaking. And just depending on the type of questions that we receive, we may combine your question with somebody else's question. With that, I give you Arthur Magida. Happy Hanukkah, Arthur. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Maya. And if you're a little closer, I'll invite you over for latkes. I am one of the world's dynamite latkes chefs. But you're far away, and I'm stuck here in Baltimore. Anyway,
maybe
thank you.
Year.
Yeah, next year in Jerusalem, next year in Baltimore. We'll see how it all works. I know. Anyway, thank you for the introduction. Claire, thank you for handling technology today. And Windham World Affairs Council, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And thank you even more broadly to the entire state of Vermont. In fact, one of the great pleasures about speaking today is that this is hosted by Vermonters whose unique state of mind, if you will, has always appealed to me. I've always felt a great affinity for Vermont's sensibility, practicality, reasonableness, and a state and a people grounded in community and how we create it, relate to it, contribute to it. It's no accident that Vermont is leading the nation in responding to COVID. The only true response is communal and community define Vermont. Thank you, Vermont. Communal and community also define the young woman we will speak about today, Noor Inayat Khan. Little known, surprisingly brave, and always faithful to her Sufi principles of love and service. Noor embodied an admirable way of relating to the world, a way we would do well to emulate today. Many of us, including me, are wary of the world. We're tired, we're exhausted, and we're just plain bummed out. I could have used a stronger word, but I'm a gentleman today. Noor also faced a threatening world. She never retreated, and she always conducted herself with the utmost integrity. Though she was killed in 1944, she isn't an artifact frozen in history. Noor is very much alive, and the power and the example of her life are still very potent for instructing us in how we can conduct ourselves today, person to person and nation to nation. But first, who the heck was Noor Inayat Khan? Well, once upon a time, there was a princess, a Sufi, an Islamic mystic. Noor is a young woman who saw the world coming apart and a young woman who did her best to try to heal it. Noor was a true global citizen. Her mother, Aura, and Claire, if you will, let's have a photo of Aura. Should be first in line in this painstakingly, there's Aura. Okay, her mother, Aura, I just said that. Noor was a global citizen and a very, very full one indeed. Her mother, Aura, was an American who lived first in Arizona and then in New York with her brother. Noor's father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, Claire, next photo, through whom Noor inherited her regal lines, was not only an Indian, but the man who introduced Sufism to the West in 1910. And Noor herself was born in Moscow, January 1st, 1914. Birthday's coming up. Let's all celebrate it. Claire, next photo. Here's baby Noor and her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan. Noor, born in Moscow, raised in London, and then in what was essentially a spiritual cocoon in Suresnes, a small village directly opposite Paris. Together, all this, an American mother, an Indian father, a Russian birth, a French and British upbringing made Noor American, Indian, Russian, British, French, as united a blend of nations as could be found in just about any one individual. And somehow, Noor held all that together, integrating all those nations, all those cultures, traditions into a unique, distinct personality, and transmuting herself into one of the most unlikely undercover agents of the Second World War. Noor was unlikely for this role because she was as ethereal an agent as any side fielded during the war. Thanks to her father, the Sufi master, Hazrat Inayat Khan, Noor practiced a very sensible non-transcendental mysticism. To become an angel, her father said, is not very difficult. To live in the world, in all the difficulties, all the struggles of the world, and to be human at the same time, that is difficult. If we become that, he continued, then we become the miniature of God on earth. For Noor and for her father, spirituality did not reside in another realm. Spirituality was here, it was now, and it was real. Noor grew into a deceptively strong-willed young woman. Next slide, Claire, thank you. She wrote music, poetry, children's short stories, essays about faith and religion, and she always put others before herself. Service, in fact, was a keystone of Noor's faith. For her, and these are her words, the essence of spirituality and mysticism is readiness to serve the person next to us. Noor's mysticism did not renounce the world, it embraced it with all its messiness and all its possibilities, all its pleasures and all its joys, all its disappointments and all its triumphs. Everything was grist for her mill, and everything she absorbed and interpreted through her rare and unique prism. So when the time came for Noor to serve during World War II, she was ready to become the most improbable agent in in Britain's top secret agency, Special Operations Executive, also known as the SOE. Noor was improbable because she was diminutive, 5'4", barely 100 pounds, about as slight as it comes. And improbable because the SOE did not habitually recruit shy, quiet, introspective mystics. And even more improbable because it didn't actually send on missions agents whose trainers said they were not overburdened with brains, which is one of Noor's handlers said about her. This guy didn't like the idea of women doing men's work, espionage, sabotage, and working behind enemy lines. Despite that, in June 1943, Noor was the first female radio operator the SOE flew into France, holding the Gestapo at bay for months while lugging her 30-pound radio around with her just about wherever she went, and never varying from the ethical principles of Sufism she'd learned from her father. And when she was finally caught, Noor told the Germans nothing. And she won their respect, even after trying to escape twice from a Gestapo prison in the center of Paris. Claire, next slide. I bet there's a Gestapo prison hiding. There it is. Okay, I just said Noor tried to escape twice from the Gestapo prison. Here it is. This is 84 Foch in the center of Paris. The first time Noor tried to escape was just 2-3 hours after the Gestapo caught her. They took her to this building. They took her up to the 5th floor. That's the highest floor in this photo. They interrogated her for a few hours. They could see they weren't going to get anything out of this woman. So they were about to take her to her cell, also on the 5th floor. And Noor asked first if there was a restroom she could use. They pointed to a room at the end of the hallway. Noor went in there. She was on the verge of closing the door entirely when a Gestapo agent said, no, we always keep a brick in the door just to see what people are doing. Noor, improbably, because that was her nature, improbably insisted and very, very vociferously that the door be entirely closed and locked. Well, for some reason, the Gestapo acquiesced or was able to close that door. But after 5, 10, 15 minutes, one of those agents got very, very suspicious. What happened to Noor Inayat Khan? And he opened the window just a little bit further down on that 5th floor, and he looked out, and he saw Noor balancing on the rain gutter. If you see just below the line of windows on that 5th floor, sort of a a vertical line. That's the rain gutter that Nora was balanced on. He managed to talk her in. It was not very easy. She did not want to comply with the Gestapo. Most people did not want to comply with the Gestapo. After Noor's second attempt, this time by scrambling across rooftops and down balconies to the street, this would have been on the opposite of 84 Avenue Foch, Noor was sent to a prison in Germany where she was locked up and shackled, wrist to wrist, ankle to ankle, and both of those sets of chains linked to each other, so she could barely stand. 10 months later, Noor was taken by train to Dachau. The next day, in a shallow pit about 100 feet from Dachau's crematorium, Noor was executed with a bullet to her head. Claire, next photo. Thank you. Noor served willingly and wholeheartedly, and with a bravery and a spiritual perspective that were uncommon throughout the war. Noor's perspective, in fact, confounded a friend of mine, a psychologist. He insisted that Noor had a death wish, an irrational impulse to extinguish herself. I told my friend there was nothing irrational about what Noor did. Yeah, she knew that radio operators were the linchpin of the SOE. Without them, the SOE could not have communicated with the agents it smuggled into Europe, coordinating activities, planning strategy, dropping supplies and money. And Noor knew that the average lifespan of a radio operator in France was 6 weeks. And by the way, Noor survived 4 months before she was caught. But Noor believed, these are her words, that sacrificing yourself for others bathes the world in a love which purifies and heals the suffering of humanity. Bathes the world in a love. This was not how undercover agents usually talked. Noor's goal was not to eliminate herself. Her goal was to heal the world, to make it better. Noor didn't have a death wish, as my psychologist friend speculated. She had a life wish. While researching Name Madeleine, I was struck by a phrase Noor wrote when she was in her mid-20s. The heart must be broken for the real to come forth. World War II broke Noor's heart, and the real came forth. In a world torn apart, Noor found her destiny, and she found her calling. And that's why hers is a story of courage, faith, resilience, a story that inspired those who knew her, a story that can inspire us now in our own chaotic, troubling, and to some degree, very tragic age. The heart must be broken for the real to come forth. That's my favorite quote from Noor. So much my favorite, I used it twice in my book. So much my favorite, I quote it almost every other day to friends. As true today as it was more than 7 decades ago when Noor wrote it, every day for many of us, our hearts are broken. And every day, the real comes forth. And every day, we are summoned to bring forth the best in ourselves, much as Noor Inayat Khan did. Among the many treats of writing this book was discovering extraordinary stories just about wherever I looked. Stories that had never been told before, stories that gave the arc of Noor's life new and intriguing dimensions. Next slide, Claire. We've seen Noor as a full-grown woman. Here's Noor as a girl, maybe 5, 6 years old. Well, I wanted to show that to you because around this time, Nora was attending kindergarten in England, in London. And in the course of my research, I was able to obtain access to Nora's report cards from kindergarten. I discovered that her talent for writing, for storytelling, was noticed as early as kindergarten. That's when Nora's teacher praised her for how well she, quote, listens and enjoys stories and can tell one herself. Other than that, Nora had some of the same faults as the rest of us, especially in kindergarten. I can certainly relate to this. She was talkative. She was a real chatterbox. I was too. She had difficulty concentrating, and her mind, one teacher complained, needed steadying and strengthening. As her life went on, Nora more than made up for this. Without a strong, steady mind, the Gestapo would have caught Nora days after she arrived in Paris, not months after she got there. Something else I discovered. Nora's father, Azradanaya Khan, was one of India's foremost musicians. He came to the West in 1910, primarily to perform at that point and to learn about Western music, not to teach Sufism. That came later. But I discovered that the club where he performed in Moscow in 1914 was owned by the African-American son of former slaves in Mississippi, a guy named Frederick Bruce Thomas. Thomas bought the club about 10 years after his parents had purchased a farm in the Deep South, shortly after the Civil War. They moved to Memphis after a white man swindled them out of their 200 acres. And there, Thomas's father was murdered. Thomas's mother barely got by, and Thomas, tired of being humiliated, headed north, working at odd jobs in St. Louis, in Chicago, in New York as a waiter, butler, head waiter all over Europe. And finally, he put down roots in Moscow, of all places, where he bought a club called Maxim, M-A-X-I-M. A year later, Nora's father was playing his vina, which is sort of a sitar, every night to a packed house. An African-American, the son of former slaves, owning a nightclub in Moscow where one of India's foremost musicians performed, blew me away. Also, in my book and for my book, I learned that in 1940, Nora and her mother and her two siblings, a brother, her sister, fled from the Germans in her brother's MG. I was excited. I love MGs. I love sport cars. But as far as I knew, it was impossible for all four of them to get away from Suresnes, the little town they lived in right outside Paris, and head off to the coast where they planned to catch a ship to England. How could four people cram into a two-seater sports car? After fairly extensive research, and after tracking down the MG Car Club Limited in England, I learned that MG had produced models with jump seats between 1922 to 1933. So after more digging, I learned that Nora's mother sat in the front passenger of this MG, passenger seat of this MG. Nora's brother, Vilayat, drove because it was his car, and Nora and her sister Claire sat behind them in the jump seat. So in my book, I write about this journey that their MG was a great car for a jolly picnic in the country, not for fleeing from the Nazis. An open air sports car, if we could have the next photo, please. An open air sports car like that one. MGs were made for auto aficionados and for car rallies and for flirting with girls in Piccadilly or at Ascot. They were not intended for joining a long line of refugees who were escaping to the coast while the Germans strafed them from the air. Next slide. Soon after leaving Suresnes, Nora's brother turned the car onto roads filled with broken down cars and broken down people. and with infantrymen humiliated by their rout, and dead horses lying in ditches, and thousands of people on bicycles. Next slide, Claire, thank you. People on bicycles weaving in and out of the rubble, and farm wagons piled high with tables and chairs and suitcases, and a grandmother being pushed in a wheelbarrow. There was a man carrying a cat, a woman carrying a bird in a cage, mothers pushing babies in prams, children carrying toys, dolls, blankies, and everyone, it seemed, was carrying pots, pans, or suitcases. Cars overheated or crept along. The flood of humanity was too dense for the autos to move any faster. And everywhere, mattresses were lashed to the tops of Renaults and Citroëns and Mercedes. On the top of one car, the body of a grandmother who had died en route was tied to a mattress because her son could not bear to leave her alongside the road. The MG maneuvered around large stones that had been thrown on the road, fruitless attempts to block German tanks. Germans in Messerschmitts and Heinkels circled above, unsure whether to strafe the refugees or let them collapse in exhaustion. Leaving the MG in tours with a friend, the Cons found seats on a train. The train, Nora wrote, was noisy and crowded with frantic young mothers with tear-stained eyes carrying their sleeping youngsters. They knew not where they were heading, said Nora, just running toward freedom if freedom was to be found. For the little one, she continued, France should be saved from enemy hands at any price. I've wiped the eyes of some, given water to others. The distress of a human being is impressive. But the distress of a whole nation, Nora asked, those whose hearts have not beaten and suffered with this cannot know what it means. Well, I am convinced, though I have no proof, that sitting in the jump seat of that MG while passing thousands upon thousands of refugees and looking them directly in the eye, because Nora would have been at that height in the jump seat, wiping the eyes of those children on the train, all that strengthened the pledge that Nora had made to herself and to one of her brothers. Somehow, she would return to France to fight the Germans. I also learned that after the SOE flew Nora into France in June 1943, she knocked on neighbors' doors in the village where she had lived before, hoping somebody would let her send messages to England from their home. She was finding it almost impossible to find a safe place from which to use her radio in Paris. She didn't know that she was surrounded by Germans. Next slide, please, Claire. In a massive 19th century fort a few blocks away from the street where she was hoping neighbors would take her in was this fort, Mont Valérien. Nor her brothers, her sister had actually played in this fort when they were kids, but now the Germans were using it to execute members of the resistance. And that August in 1943, when Nora was begging neighbors to let her use her radio from their homes, Joseph Axelrod was executed in this fort, and Marcel Guyon, and Jules Godfrey, and Jules Diane, and Michel Legois, and more. And the next month, Abel Blanchard, and Marcel Bernet, and more were killed. By the end of the war, almost 1,200 Frenchmen would be killed in that fort. Nora also didn't know that every time she returned to the home, which did let her use it to send radio messages to London, she walked through a gauntlet of Germans. 33 Gestapo agents were living on that same block. 28 were living in Noor's family's home, which was right around the corner. More were living in 17 other homes a block away. Everywhere Noor walked, there were Germans. I also discovered that one of the stories we've heard about how the Allies conducted the war is a myth. War is perfect for myth making. The myth I'm referring to is that the Allies did everything they could to protect Paris, and that it was Hitler, and Hitler alone, who was determined to desecrate the world's most beautiful city by blowing up its finest museums as the German troops were retreating after D-Day. We never hear about the Allied bombing in 1943 and 1944, sometimes twice a day, sometimes more. Bombs intended for a factory missed their target, killing 300 civilians and injuring 400 more. A bomb smashed into a metro station, killing 80 people. Another bomb killed 7 people at a racetrack. And Noor, I write in my book, heard the bombs. Everyone did. Possibly she saw the damage. Many people didn't. But Noor had worries beyond the bombs. Every second, she had to be alert, aware, awake. A few weeks after she was flown into France, she was barely getting any rest, not with constantly running around, trying to find a safe house from which to send messages to England, reconstructing cells, which the Germans had wrecked soon after she arrived, and retrieving coded messages from secret drop boxes that were scattered all over the city. And speaking of bombs, for most of the war, the Allies spared the German city of Pforzheim. That's where Noor was imprisoned after her second escape attempt from that Gestapo prison in Paris at 84 Avenue Foch. But in 1944, I learned, American planes repeatedly attacked Pforzheim, and Noor's prison was a few blocks away from some of the worst bombing. The prison shook with every explosion. In her cell, Noor remained in solitary and in chains. The Germans gave Noor no reprieve from the hell they'd locked her up in. She stayed that way for 10 months. But what for Noor, and this is really important, what for Noor did fighting the Germans mean? Next slide, please, Claire, thank you. Fighting meant never forgetting that she was a Sufi, never forgetting the rules of chivalry that her father had laid down when Noor was 12 years old. The rules emphasize modesty, humility, empathy, and discipline. Do not neglect those who depend upon you. Bear no malice against your worst enemy. Hold your head high in all circumstances. Consider duty as sacred as religion. And break not your word of honor, whatever may befall. This was a knighthood of conscience, spirit, courage, persistence, dignity. Another rule was to harm no one for your own benefit. Many people have called Noor a pacifist. She wasn't. She didn't believe in violence and she tried to avoid it, but she didn't fully believe in passive resistance either. While Noor admired Gandhi's campaign for India's independence, she knew that pacifism had its limits. Fighting the British as a pacifist like Gandhi did made sense. Fighting Hitler as a pacifist was suicide. And further souring Noor on Gandhi was his cavalier attitude towards the Nazis. Gandhi urged Jews in Europe to pray for Hitler, to resist him without violence, though that would guarantee their massacre, and massacre is Gandhi's word for what would happen. It's not my word. And he urged the British to stop fighting Germany. though he knew that a Nazi victory would cost the English their lives and their homes. And he repeatedly offered to mediate between the Allies and Hitler, who Gandhi stated several times was not a bad man, nor knew Hitler was a bad man. And she knew how the Nazis were treating the Jews. Yet her infatuation with pacifism was sufficient for her brother to question if it would require her to remain neutral as the Germans were pouring into France in 1940. Can we just stand by and watch what the Nazis are doing? He asked his sister. If Nazis came to the door and took 20 people who they planned to kill, would you be an accomplice to their deaths if nonviolence stopped you from killing the Germans and preventing these deaths? Or couldn't stand by and watch. And that's why she jumped. So she ended up in the jump seat of her brother's MG, hoping somehow to get to England and from England back to France. Nor was ideal for the SOE, Special Operations Executive. She knew French, she knew France, she was intimately familiar with Paris and its immediate environs. She was brave, braver than she seemed when the SOE first recruited her. But to be a good agent, Nora was put in the position of possibly bending one of her father's cardinal principles: never lie. Her father taught, truth is all the religion there is. Maybe, but undercover agents can't be truthful without deceit and guile. An agent was a dud, probably a dead dud. The SOE, anyway, flew Nor into France, June 1943. Shortly before she got there, the other members of her cell were caught by the Germans. Essentially, she was alone. And really, that's when her true adventure began. And that's when she really began to encounter the cost of her mission. As I write in my book, Nor knew that we pay a price in life, the price we pay to receive life. If paying that price was not, as she said, the highest and most inconceivable joy, that was not a willing offering. Until the middle of 1943, June, when Nora was flown into France, the price she paid in life, the gift she'd offered to the world, to her friends, were mostly her music and her stories and her love for others. In Paris that summer, hiding and on the run from the Germans and alone, she began to more fully appreciate that the most profound gift was expressed in sacrifice. And most sacrifices, Nor believed, were relatively small, often involving wealth or material possessions. But the greatest sacrifice, she wrote, was the sacrifice of oneself. And the best, the truest sacrifice was for humanity. And that's why one of the key lessons we can learn from Nor, and why for a page or two in my book, when I bring up Nor's idea of sacrifice, the action essentially stops. I want my readers like Nor to ask themselves, do we have courage? Are we willing to make sacrifices? Are we willing to make the final sacrifice, any kind of sacrifice? Well, I hope that's what my readers are doing when they get to that point in the book. I also wrote that Nor's father urged her to look at humanity without thinking they are German or English or French. They are all equally dear to the awakened soul. And to these souls, he wrote, Judgment Day does not come after death. For that soul, every day is a judgment day. Without thinking they're German, English, or French, deserves repeating and emphasis. Nor made no distinction between these. She wasn't fighting against the Germans. She wasn't fighting for the English or for the French. She was fighting for humanity. In Paris, Noor built new cells. She ensured that money and arms kept flowing to the resistance. She sent messages to London about German troop movements and which factories and airports should be bombed. Messages about the frequencies the Germans were using to communicate with their submarines, and much more. One of her messages, in fact, was indispensable to D-Day, which was still a year away. She asked London to send a plane to pick up 2 French agents. They had a map of German defenses in Brittany. 2 weeks before D-Day, 1944, 3 French paratroopers jumped into Brittany, teamed up with the resistance, dynamited petrol dumps, and destroyed most of the Nazis' communications in that entire region. This slowed down German troops desperate to get to Normandy on D-Day itself and stop the Allied soldiers who were pouring into France. Noor's contributions to victory were indispensable, and they're largely and sadly not known. One member of the resistance who was especially close to Noor was Pierre Vianon. He was only 3 years older than Noor, but he kept a really close eye on her. When her radio broke, he got it fixed in his electronics factory. When she needed a place to send messages back to London, he let her use his apartment. And he thought fast when she needed to keep her cover hidden from Germans or from collaborators. I wrote in the book, occasionally Noor and Vianon met on the small patio outside a brasserie at 119 Rue Saint-Rosaire. Name of this brasserie in English, At the King of Beer. In fact, the exterior of the brasserie had on the second floor had a statue of the King of Beer himself, lifting a stein of his favorite brew. Another sculpture, a large white stork, perched on the chimney, and underneath all this whimsy, Noor and Vianon spoke of matters serious and grim. All went well until the day Vianon saw his uncle coming their way. His uncle favored Brittain, the puppet the Germans had installed to run the free zone in southern France. Not wanting to give his uncle a chance to talk with Noor, his peculiar Indian American French English accent might have given her away. Vianon impulsively took Noor by the waist and leaned over as if he was about to kiss her. His uncle walked by as if he'd seen nothing. Stunned by Vianon's passion, Noor laughed when he explained why he grabbed her. When Vianon got home an hour later, his uncle was already there, telling Vianon's wife what he'd witnessed. Elizabeth was furious. A row ensued between these two. The couple finally made up when Pierre's uncle left, and Vianon could tell his wife the truth about what happened between him and Noor. And by the way, I've located that cafe. King of Bear is still on the second floor facade. The large white stork is still on the roof. This place is now a McDonald's, of course. And when it was apparent that Gestapo agents were getting closer to Noor, Vianon told her to change her appearance and stop wearing her Macintosh. She'd been seen in it all over Paris. And to get her hair dyed a different color and get away from that blue that you wear every day, he told her. A friend of Vianon's took Noor shopping and to a hairdresser. By the time they were done, I wrote in the book, Vianon almost didn't recognize her. Pleated skirt, broad brimmed hat, a tailored coat made her fashionable and chic. Her hair was a light brown, it complemented her eyes. It flowed, it rippled after the hairstylist had expertly applied lotions and shampoos. Vianon was pleased, but he had one problem. As before, everything Noor wore was blue. Even with the Germans closing in, Noor couldn't shake her habits. She liked blue. Not long before Noor's do-over, that didn't necessarily do her over, Noor defended a member of the resistance who others were saying had betrayed her to the Gestapo. I can't believe he would do it, Noor kept repeating. No, no, no. I didn't think he would do it. Not him. Definitely not him. And maybe, she said, maybe the resistance had acted like that because the Gestapo had threatened his wife. Maybe they threatened his young son. We don't know all that happened, Noor told her friends. We must not judge. Even while trying to stay one step ahead of the Gestapo, Noor remained a devout Sufi, a Sufi who did not judge. We cannot judge the action of another nor believe. We can only say, I must not do this. When we judge someone, we may easily be wrong, she claimed, nor refused to be wrong. Noor never lost her faith in her faith. When she was caught after trying to escape a second time from that Gestapo prison in Paris, she was given a choice. If she gave her word of honor not to escape again, she could remain in that fairly comfortable prison. Noor couldn't do that. Her honor was sacred. Her honor was her bond. Her attachment to truth was also sacred. And as her father taught her, break not your word of honor, whatever may befall. By refusing to lie and by insisting on maintaining her honor, Noor became the first British agent to be sent to a prison in Germany, one of the few to be locked up under Hitler's night and fog decree. Night and fog prisoners were shorn of their names. They were confined in cold cells. They almost starved. The Nazis said that in the fog and in the night, prisoners would vanish without a trace. In a German prison, Noor would vanish. There were few details about how Noor handled her 10 months at Pforzheim. German prison where the Nazis locked her up in solitude. She couldn't talk with anyone. She couldn't see anyone. She couldn't write. She wasn't given anything to write. Quite likely, she retreated into herself. Before the war, she had written that solitude was a way to know ourselves, to know our true self. Everyone Noor believed descends into a darkness before realization shall come. In the darkness of Pforzheim, Noor would have tested that conviction. On September 12th, 1944, a train took Noor and 3 other female agents to Dachau. Reports vary about what happened next. Maybe the 4 agents were executed that night, maybe the next morning. Whenever it happened, most likely Noor was killed by a bullet to her head as she held hands with another woman. She was 30 years old. If Noor spent the night of September 12th at Dachau, as one account states, her cell would have been a few doors down from the of Martin Niemöller. Niemöller, as some of you may know, was a Lutheran pastor who had opposed the Nazi takeover of churches in Germany. After the war, he gained fame for his confession about the timidity that had contaminated Germans during Hitler's reign. First they came for the communists, Niemöller wrote, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. At Dachau, no one spoke for Noor. The best stories sneak up on us out of nowhere. Noor sneaked up on me out of nowhere. I'd never heard of her before until some friends who make documentary films sent me a PR release about one that was about to be broadcast on NPR 2013, 2014. I read through it. Noor Inayat Khan's name was in the first paragraph. I shrugged that off. Had no idea who this woman was. The SOE, Special Operations Executive, was also mentioned in the first graph. Again, no dent in my head because I'd never heard of the SOE. But Noor's father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was mentioned in the second paragraph, and they stated that Noor was his daughter. At that point, I woke up because I was very familiar with Hazrat Inayat Khan and his teachings. And for Hazrat Inayat Khan's daughter to be a secret agent in Paris made absolutely no sense to me. And because it made no sense, I was completely and instantly riveted to this story. We had a preview of this film, Enemy of the Reich, at the university where I was then teaching. About 300 people showed up. It was a wonderful experience. But at that point, I was committed to write a book about Noor. I wrote to her nephew, Pirzia, asking for an interview. He heads the order, the Sufi order in the United States. We set up a date, but a week or two before I went to New Lebanon, New York, where he was then living. I emailed him if he knew of any Sufi teachings, any kind of teachings that may have sustained Noor while she was at that Forsheim prison. And he sent me a paragraph from the Bhagavad Gita, which he had heard had helped Noor. It was a nice paragraph. It was a wonderful verse. But I reached over to my bookshelf for my own copy of the Bhagavad Gita. I found that verse. I just wanted to compare translations. What I found very strange was that I had not opened my copy of the Bhagavad Gita for a very long time. And a very long time ago, I had put brackets and pencil around only one verse of the Gita. It was the same one that quite possibly had sustained Noor while she was at Forsheim. In the bonds of work, it states, I am free. The man who can see this truth in his work, he finds freedom. He's free from all bonds. His mind has found peace and wisdom, and his work is a holy sacrifice. The work of such a man is pure. If you're curious and you have a Bhagavad Gita handy, this is verse 4. 14:23. It teaches that sacrificing yourself for others can lead to enlightenment, that work with no ego attached to it is liberating and freeing. And this was the essence of Noor's character: love, selflessness, sacrifice. 2 weeks later, I went to New Lebanon, New York. I had my Bhagavad Gita with me. Halfway through the interview with Pirzia, I pulled it out of my backpack. I finally found the page with that verse. I thought he would get a kick out of seeing what I did with a pencil 2-3 decades ago. As I was about to hand it to him, I noticed that not only a long time ago had I put brackets around the verse, I had also written selfless action, which is what this verse is about, equals liberty. It liberates you. Selfless action equals liberty. I then handed it to Pirzia, and he almost shrugged and said, well, of course, because Noor's last word at Dachau before she was killed was liberty. You can make of that story what you wish. It's beyond my interpretation. Researching this book took me to France and Germany and England, to archives and churches and convents, to a death camp, to Sufi retreats, to Noor's family's home near Paris, to elementary schools where students have done lengthy projects on Noor, and to the town where Noor lived before the war, which now has a street and a school named after her. And everywhere I went, people were eager to talk about Noor. That was released from some of my other books, which too often were about bad guys or shady guys or guys with incredibly bad judgment. A book about a rabbi who hired a hitman to kill his wife. A book about an enormously successful Jewish mind reader who stupidly got too close to some of the top Nazis of Berlin in the 1930s. A book about the head of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan, who has made some highly inflammatory statements about Jews and whites and about many African Americans. These aren't guys you want to hang around with too much. But immersing myself into the life of a good person and not those rascals was a completely different experience, a refreshing experience. Those guys were cautionary tales. They represent what we should not do in life, nor models how we should behave, especially how we should behave toward each other. Her influence was surprising, and looking back in time, it was probably inevitable because I was so immersed with her. Noor, in fact, made me a better person. At some point while writing the book, I profusely thanked someone who had done me a small, minor favor. And that's enough, she said. What's the matter with you? Oh, I said to her, you're right, but Noor's made me a better person, a kinder person, a more thoughtful person, and I want to thank you. And I want to thank you profusely. And I did. I kept on going like that, probably to this other person's irritation. Another time, I was irked at someone who hadn't done what I'd asked her to do, even though I was sure she would have benefited from it. For 2 days, I didn't talk with her. And I kicked myself. If Noor could forgive a member of the resistance who other resistance were sure had betrayed her to the Germans. Remember she said, don't judge. Then I could forgive my friend for the smallest of infractions. And I did. So given Noor's slow and steady influence on me, most of which I was not aware of when it occurred, I should not have been surprised when I went to Noor's family's home the first of 3-4 visits. A friend had given me a verse from the Quran, basically a prayer for the dead. She wanted me to read this at a place that I thought was most appropriate on my journey. I was taken into Noor's family's home, was shown into a room they called the Oriental Room. This is actually where Noor had a very crucial conversation with her brother about whether they should stay or flee the Germans and fight the Germans in someplace. There was a small table with sort of a shrine, an altar to Noor with photos of her. I took the prayer my friend had given me out of my backpack. I approached the photos, and I'm not the kind of fellow who falls on his knees. As I got closer, I fell on my knees, and with this prayer held in both hands, I said it directly to the photos of Noor, completely with no sense of being awkward or being improper. This felt like the absolutely spontaneous thing to do. Well, one of the glories of working on this story is finding people who responded much as I did. There was a 3rd grader in a school in France. The school is named after Noor. And when I asked the class what they had learned from Noor, there was a little kid directly in front of me. He began waving his arms like crazy. And of course, I had to ask him what he'd learned from Noor. And he said, I learned from Noor that we should always help other people. And if my sister falls into a hole, I'm going to pull her out. And that was so sweet. And we should all help our brothers and our sisters when and if they fall into holes. And in this life, many people fall into many holes, as some of us have noticed. I've also learned while working on this book that we can apply Noor's lesson to many, many aspects of our conduct, wherever it happens, whenever it happens. We are embroiled in a pandemic, as you may have noticed, and that is why several weeks ago, actually in the middle of the summer, as the pandemic was literally heating up, I put on Facebook, in this environment, do not spare yourself in the work which you must accomplish. Hold your ideal high in all circumstances. I would like all of us to hold our head high. I learned that in our age of runaway mendacity, Noor's adherence to truth is an indispensable reminder of the power of honesty. Truth, Noor believed, is all the religion there is. It is truth which will save us. It should be sculpted on every building in Washington and every building everywhere. In our age of expediency and moral compromise, Noor's devotion to honor is a lesson in fortitude and tenacity. Her honor was sacred to her. She refused to violate it, even to avoid being sent from a comfortable prison in Paris to a hellhole in Germany. In our age of political timidity and calculation, Noor's constancy and fearlessness are a needed compass for now. We better ourselves, she said, by rising to the challenges of life. We experience joy, her word, by helping others, by sacrificing ourselves for them. So I met that little kid in that school. I learned about the power of truth. I learned about the joy of sacrifice. And I learned how a Catholic mother superior at the convent, which is immediately adjacent to Dachau, relates to her. A friend had told me that this mother superior has a photograph of Noor on her desk at the convent. Can we have the next slide, please, Claire? Thank you very much. There, back to Dachau, by the way. And I did a 45-minute interview with this mother superior. And during that interview, I glanced at the crucifix that was right next to where we were sitting. I said to her, I'm sure you pray to Jesus. I'm sure you pray for Jesus. Do you pray for Noor? No, she said, I pray with Noor. And I also met Mary, Noor's 88-year-old sister-in-law. What, I asked Mary when I interviewed her, what was in Noor's nature that led her from believing in fairies and writing numerous poems about them all the way up into her teens to resisting the Nazis and then trying to escape twice from a heavily guarded prison in Paris? Mary paused for a moment and then she looked directly into my eyes and said, Noor always believed in the unbelievable. And that may be the ultimate lesson from Noor. We should always believe in the unbelievable, in the far-fetched and the good, in our incredible capacity for courage, and in our unquenched quest for truth, for wisdom, and for ourselves. For we are more than what we seem, and the world is more than what we see. And even the most unlikely of us can make the most improbable of differences in the short time allotted to us on this earth, even if, as Nora said, our hearts are broken. At that juncture, Nora was sure, as am I, the real comes forth and our real work begins. Our hearts have broken enough in 2020. As we move forward, let us all engage in what Judaism calls tikkun olam, repairing the world. This is no different than how Nora and her father lived their lives. We must not turn our backs on life, they said. Life is a struggle, and we must be ready to struggle. Let the struggle begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Arthur. Oh dear, I can't hear you. Oh, there you are. Okay, you're back.
Hi, I'm here.
Yeah. You know, there's so much that happens in the book itself, and I really appreciate you talking about your journey. And I want to ask you in a minute about your research process and how you went about that. But I actually have a question first, really more about the story and Noor's formative younger years. I think as a woman reading this book, and of course in our modern age, even knowing what I know about her story, I still can't help but wonder, you know, what were, you know, all of the things that influenced her decision to put herself in this position that felt fatalistic and in fact was. But, you know, for me, the book was, you know, one of irony and contradiction and tragedy in many ways. And I think that it's ironic that Noor, who lived her life on the principle of love, was bullied into giving up the romantic love of her life. Related to this irony is a classism that runs rampant throughout the story. Noor gives up her love because of her uncles. Even her mother, Ora, who was an American, felt that her Jewish turned Sufi fiance was not of the appropriate class for her. Noor's uncles, who preach chivalry and seemingly that Sufism is a religion that does not judge others, also believe that Ora, Noor's mother, is inferior and that Noor's father never should have married her. Meanwhile, Ora's brother, a faux yogi celebrity from Iowa, cut Ora off because she married Noor's father, and we ultimately get the impression that Ora thinks that Noor's uncles are inferior. In an era where we as Americans are becoming more aware of extreme class segmentation, what impact do you think this classist culture had on Noor and her decisions? And also, you know, is our awareness of classism making an impact on the decisions that we are making today?
Mm-hmm.
We
have another hour, right?
Another hour.
Okay, good. Yeah. And let's take a commercial break as well. I'm sure there's some local maple syrup manufacturer somewhere in Brattleboro who's taken out many commercial segments. First of all, yeah, you're right. And I didn't want to get too immersed in that romantic aspect of Noor's story, though it's fascinating. Those of you who have not purchased the book, first of all, it makes a great Hanukkah and or Christmas and or New Year's present. Or buy it and start reading it on January 1st, which is Noor's birthday, by the way. Yeah, you referred to so many things. Okay, let me bring some of the folks way out in Zoom land up to date. You referred to Noor's love of her life. This was a guy named Eli, who indeed was Jewish. The family was opposed to the match. They thought it was a misalliance because they thought that Eli was underneath her in the class system, and indeed he was relatively poor. And Noor and her family had slightly higher stature, and because of various facets of Hazrat Khan's career, they had following, which ensured that the family had not great wealth, but were certainly taken care of. So Azim, as he became known because he was, and finally in the mid-30s converted to Sufism, he indeed courted Noor the best he could, and Vilayat, Noor's brother, tried to split them up the best he could, and every summer Noor and Vilayat would go on long vacations, and really the prime purpose of that was for Vilayat to attempt to convince Noor never to see this fellow again. But you're right, there were all these contradictions. There was Noor's uncle, who was a major big deal yogi in the United States, who was opposed to Aura, his sister, running away, eloping with the woman who would eventually be Noor's mother. He didn't want a black, darker skinned person in the family. Hazrat Inayat Khan's brothers did not want Hazrat to marry this American. They didn't like her. They thought she was scheming, and that certainly she wasn't worthy of their brother. So we have, as you just said, all these class distinctions. How did Noor handle them? With her usual grace and elegance and determination, which would all help her later in life in 1943-44. I really see no difference between that and how she conducted herself when she was up against the Germans. If you can be up against your uncles who don't want you to marry the man of your life, if you can take care of your three siblings, starting 1927, because your mother, Aura, this American woman, is basically so bereft after her husband, Hazrat Inayat, dies, that she cannot take care of them. If you have the time while going to the Sorbonne and also to the finest music academy in Paris in the 1930s to write beautiful poetry and children's stories and wonderful music, some of which we heard at the beginning of this, then you nor have a mind that is highly disciplined and highly focused. And while we're on Noor, just 1 second, although I know we've been on Noor quite a bit, I'm often asked whether Noor was the wrong person for the SOE to send to France in June 43. And I'm always amazed that anybody would ask that. I believe she was more than the right person. I believe in a sense she was almost born to do this. First of all, as I said before, the average radio operator lasted 6 weeks in Paris, Noor lasted 4 months. Noor went like day after day after day, site to site to site, looking around this 30-pound radio that the SOE cleverly masqueraded in a suitcase. That required so much stamina, so much energy, psychic and or otherwise. And there is a wonderful phrase in the Quran 2:33, those of you who like to look up texts and verses, no soul is tasked beyond its capacity. If you are to listen to the Quran, then please believe no soul, especially Noor's soul, was tasked beyond its capacity. Noor was able to juggle all these distinctions and contradistinctions and ironies within her family, and she was able to handle everything that came to her starting June 43 when the SOE sent her to France, and she did it with aplomb and skill.
Well, thank you. So can you talk a little bit about sort of your research process and also how you were able to sort of uncover how Noor was recruited, or in fact, was she recruited, or did she kind of recruit herself?
No, in England in 1942, you did not raise your hand and say, I want to be in the SOE. The SOE was a top secret organization. I will speak in a moment about my research methods, but let's stay first on how the SOE recruited Noor. Noor, late 1942, had served in an auxiliary branch of the Royal Air Force. She was helping to train pilots for missions overseas. She was really master and the wizard on the telegraph, and that's how she got messages to these pilots who were in training. She wanted a commission. She went before a commission board. She didn't get her commission, but she impressed the members of this board so much that they recommended her to the SOE. And shortly after that, Nora was invited to a literally secret interview in a location in London. She was interviewed. Of course, at the outset, she had no idea why, because she never heard of the SOE, and there's no reason she ever should have. But she was given time to think about this. She also told the man who interviewed her, a man who actually wrote novels in all his spare time, that she worried about her mother, how her mother would handle her absence. The next day, Nora wrote a letter to this man and said, in moments of war, even sacrifice like this must come before family, which really surprised me, knowing how devoted Nora was to her mother. On research, whenever I begin a project like this, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm adult, I'm an idiot, and I'm a dunce. I now have 12 to 14 boxes of Nora material that I accumulated. It is filling up my house. At the outset, I had the Bhagavad Gita. That was it. I'd never read it. Oh, I had read some material by Nora's father, Hazrat Anand Khan. I had no books by Nora. As I said before, I went up to New Lebanon, New York, and I interviewed Nora's nephew, Pirzia. And that was the beginning of interviews with a number of members of the family, both in the United States, in The Hague, in France, and in Germany, and they provided an enormous amount of material. There's also a wonderful Sufi archive in The Hague and another in Saran opposite Paris. They provide terrific material. There, I went to the British Archives, the National Archives in London. Extraordinary stuff. They have files about Nora. They have files about the SOE. They have files about numerous other agents, and that's how I was able to flesh out the story. So it was an endless series of interviews and digging and excavating through very musty archives.
Right. Well, I think this is your journalistic training definitely coming through here as well, and being willing to go down that rabbit hole when you don't really know where it's going to take you, and also your Marlboro Plan experience where you and I both had that gaping maw of a rabbit hole stuck us in and spit us back out. But let's see, we have some really lovely comments coming in from people. Michelle Moyes says, thank you for your talk, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to become acquainted with this inspiring and wonderful woman. I feel especially close to Nora's story, having lived my early years in France during the Nazi occupation under the Vichy occupation. So that's incredible.
Can I interject one thing?
Yes.
Real quickly, I promise. That reminds me of one of many, many comments I've received from readers of the book. One came middle of the summer from a woman I didn't know. She said she's a Sufi. She lives in Germany. And this woman's grandfather had been a German general during the war.
Oh my God.
He had been one of the German high-ranking military who had conspired against Hitler for the July 20th, 1944 attempt on Hitler's life. He was summarily killed after that. But this woman wrote me from Germany that if her grandfather had known about Nora, he would have loved Nora. The comments that come in are phenomenal and heartwarming and heart-shattering.
Sure. Well, Peter Reed from the Bronx in New York says, I was really interested in the idea of non-transcendental mysticism. Can you please elaborate on that, since it sounds like a paradox, which is kind of a theme.
Peter from the Bronx. Do you know J-Lo from the Bronx? Come on. Peter, do you know Arthur from the Bronx? I bet you don't. But I am originally from the Bronx. No, there's absolutely nothing contradictory about non-transcendental mysticism. We all hear about transcendental meditation, but there are varieties of mysticism, first of all, Peter from the Bronx. And yes, there are many mystical experiences that encourage transcendence. And there are many that encourage you to move. You're from the Bronx. I don't know if you're still there. There are many that encourage you maybe not to move to a cave in the Himalayas, but maybe to your rooftop in the Bronx and meditate there. But there are other varieties of meditation, and I'm saying one is better than the other, but there are other varieties of meditation that ask that we remain right here with whatever lessons we have learned from possible transcendence. It is that transcendence that imbues love, that imbues compassion. It is that transcendence that makes us aware of the community around us. It is that transcendence that allows us to do what Noor's father asked that we do. Spirituality, he said, is serving those next to us. It's not getting away from those next to us, although some days that would be damn tempting. It's serving them. There is a Buddhist meditation group in Washington, IMCW, Insight Meditation of, ICMW, Insight Meditation Center of Washington. You can look it up on Google. And I go there, used to go there before the pandemic. And one of their of their teachings is to be involved with the world. Don't stay away from it. We're all in the world. They have a site called Off the Pillow. To them and to me, meditating, being, quote, spiritual, is not just sitting on a pillow and meditating and chanting and lighting incense and being holy and righteous. It's being in the world. It's being off the pillow. So Peter from the Bronx, if you want to play stickball with me someday, but I will transcend the shit out of you.
I love it. Claire, do you want to pop back on and ask your question? I think you, as a historian, you probably have some thoughts on all of this, if you're willing to share while we're waiting for other questions to come in.
Yeah, sure. I'll definitely leave the stickball conversation in the Bronx. I'm not going to step into that. I'm from Connecticut myself. So thanks so much for this talk. It's she sounds like quite an enchanting woman, and you really opened up this story for us. The thing that I was wondering is, you mentioned her physicality, that she was quite small and slight. And you said that it made her perhaps unsuited for espionage. And, of course, misdirection is a vital tool in all espionage, undertakings. And I'm wondering if she would have employed the techniques of, what we call a honey trap now, like a woman seducing powerful, vulnerable men, or if that's something that would have gone against her morals. That's my question for you about her techniques and how she handled herself with respect.
And you presented this as a multiple choice question, and I appreciate that. And the last choice was this against her morals? You're dang right. Yes.
Did they ask her to do things like that, and she refused? No. I mean, how do you know?
They did not ask her. The SOE did not ask her.
Okay, they just knew that she wouldn't do it.
Well, aside from that, that was not part of her training. And yeah, we all have this romanticized idea of what a female spy would have done.
It's not romanticized, it's Russian. I mean, it's a thing. It's definitely a list.
But also it's been extrapolated from several women who did do this to all who could have possibly done it, and not more. No, she was never asked to do this. She had no inclination to do this. She had this boyfriend she had ditched back in Suren to begin with.
Was forced to ditch. Beg to differ. Forced to ditch. Anyway, you go.
Okay, differ away. Thank you. Although in the end,
I read the book.
She did. I'm glad somebody did. I'm going to give you
I thoroughly plan to read the book.
Okay. No, she on the notion of misdirection. There were sort of two schools of that in the SOE. One was you send the least conspicuous person to France or any other place where they had agents. The least conspicuous, the least noticeable. And a lot of people they sent over to France were extremely non-conspicuous. There were others like Noor who were beautiful. Noor was just a little bit more conspicuous than some of those lovely women because her skin was slightly darker than the others, because she had this really peculiar accent gained from an American mother and an Indian father, and living for a while in England and living for most of her life in France. You put all that together, and Noor possibly was the most unlikely person they ever should have sent there. And yeah, she was very slight, and that certainly could not have helped her during the 4 months that she was dragging around this 30-pound radio. And yet she endured and she persisted. And that's another reason why I'm constantly in awe of this woman. And we have suitcases on wheels now. We have devices that I'm talking into right now, my Samsung telephone, which must weigh 1,000th of an ounce, and we can communicate long distances with these. Noor's had 30 pounds, and on top of that, whenever she needed to send a message to England or whenever she needed to receive one, she had to find a place where she could stretch a 70-pound antenna. That further put her life in danger.
Wow.
So we have somebody who's slight, we have somebody who's very noticeable, we have somebody who in the best of all worlds could not, or in a different world, had not have been pursued this mission as successfully as she did, and yet she defied every single odd against her.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we are at 5:30. We have an awesome question from Scott Cooper, who is also one of our board members. And if anybody else would like to, give us more questions, we could probably do one or two. And and Scott just said, my daughter's name is Madeleine. I'm going to buy 2 copies of the book, one for me, one for her. You definitely should. He says 3. You saw that, but anyway, we'll talk, Scott. But your awesome question is one that actually really has struck me, and I've spent a fair bit of time sort of trying to reconcile this. He says, I'm interested in your comments about Gandhi. Gandhi has almost been declared a saint. My experience in South Africa has challenged his sainthood in regards to people of color and even the treatment of his wife. My first question is there literature that challenges Gandhi's stance on Hitler and the Third Reich? And second, do you accuse Gandhi to justify him, or do you accuse him as a product of his ignorance, though he may be a saint nonetheless?
So we're now dealing with an ignorant saint. Thank you so much, Scott. Actually, this reminds me of an incident that happened yesterday in Washington. As some of you may have heard, there were some major demonstrations and stabbings in Washington by conflicting sides in our political circus. And the statue of Gandhi outside the Indian embassy was desecrated. Which side did it? I'm not sure. But that brings us up to date regarding this alleged saint. I do not know of a specific book that addresses Gandhi's approach towards the Nazis. I have maybe a page and a half, 2 pages in my book related to Gandhi. And like many people, I had always been impressed with him. Like possibly a minority, I had always been upset with Gandhi's, quote, sexual experiments and sleeping with his niece for a few years, but that was only to test Gandhi's brahmacharya. Yeah, I saw those eyes roll. Brahmacharya is Hindu chastity. Gandhi always claimed he was chaste. Perhaps he wasn't. We'll never know. That had always upset me about Gandhi. But as I began to research the book and I read up a little bit about Gandhi in several histories, I learned about his attitude towards the Nazis. And I think he was just plain dumb. You know, he was 6,000 to 7,000 miles away from Europe. He had little idea what was happening in Germany and France and to England. And being Gandhi, he thought that every individual, even Hitler, had a small kernel of goodness in him. So I think his ignorance, refusal to ask for more information about the situation on the continent, his certainty that there is a benign quality in every individual and every cause led him to say what he did about Hitler and about Jews praying for Hitler and about the British surrendering to him. And I wish somebody had upbraided him severely during the war. Is he a saint? No. But who am I to declare anybody a saint? And certainly what he did in South Africa precludes the possibility of his sainthood.
Yeah. Thank you. And Scott says, good answer. And Genevieve Prentice, who is one of our fellow Marlboro Fighting Dead Trees, so Marlboro alumna, says, please talk in more detail about, hi, by the way, about the information Noor provided in advance of D-Day and how that information was used.
We won. Next question.
You.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, we won that war. It's the one that's going on right now that I'm worried about in this country and others. Well, as I said before, Noor arranged for 2 Frenchmen to be flown back to London. First of all, I was always, when I began doing this story, I was amazed that there were literally fleets of airplanes connecting France and London. The Germans' radar was not very sophisticated, and the British had these planes called Lysanders, which they adapted to fly under German radar, and hundreds and hundreds of agents were flown in and others were flown out. Noor arranged for these 2 Frenchmen to be flown back to England sometime late summer of 1943. She told London these men had what she called buckets of cherries, code word for information you do not want to miss out on. And those were blueprints and detailed plans of German facilities and German troop placement in Brittany. And about a year later, a couple of weeks before D-Day, 3 French paratroopers landed in Brittany. They tied up with the resistant members, and they basically decimated the German communication system in that area and prevented, I think, about 100,000 German troops from reaching the beaches at Normandy. So that's key to our having this conversation today and the Germans not winning. I referred before to this guy, Pierre Vianon, who sat at that cafe with Noor. Uncle walked by, he grabbed Noor and he kissed her, and she was rather surprised because she was a rather demure young woman. Even though Claire is attempting to have her become a Matahari, she was not. Pierre was a very savvy businessman. He ran a very successful electronics company. He made many trips between Paris and Berlin. He had a false bottom on his suitcase. One of those trips he brought back to Noor German blueprints for a device that helped German subs, U-boats, detect when Allied radar was focused on them and Allied sonar. That was then sent, courtesy of Noor, back to England, and it gave the Allies, and the British in particular, a leg up on how the Germans were functioning. So we don't hear about Noor and other women like her. And, you know, in the last 5-10 years or so, there's been a spate of books about women in the SOE or women in other espionage services, but they are getting what is due them much too belatedly.
That's great. Laredo Messina has at first, Genevieve says, thank you. And Laredo says, Norman Finkelstein wrote What Gandhi Says. You can find it here, and there's a link, and I will go ahead and put that into chat if folks want to go ahead and follow up on that. And then let's see, I'm not seeing other questions in the queue. We're about 10 minutes over, but I was just wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about other things that are going on with your book right now. Obviously, the Pulitzer nomination is a big deal, I think. I don't know. And you recently had a request to translate it into a foreign language. You, I understand, have a movie option happening. Do you want to talk about any of those things?
No.
No,
yes, of course I do. I'm very proud of all. No. And actually it isn't just an option for Romanian translation. I have a contract for the book to be translated into Romanian, and that's wonderful. That came about last week. I hope that there will be other foreign translations, although I've learned that they are extremely difficult to acquire these days. We have a pandemic, and we have a dreadful global economy, and for a publisher to translate an item requires them buying the property, then requires them putting more money into hiring somebody to translate it, and then the publisher also has to essentially design the book from scratch because they don't have access to what my American publisher did. So yes,
and we have Google Translate, right?
Wrong.
Okay. Just checking.
Check again. And yes, there were two actresses and their production companies who were extremely eager to acquire my book, Name Madeleine. My agent and I have narrowed it down to one for many, many reasons. We're in the final hours, I hope, of nailing down every possible clause in the film contract. And I had a wonderful 2-hour conversation near the end of the summer with this particular actress and her husband. She sees Noor as I do. She sees a possible Noor film the way I do, and she responded to my book the way I wish everybody had, including new Maya. Months ago, excuse me, I told a friend that if my readers did not cry when they finished my book, I wouldn't have failed in my mission. This actress, whose name I'm not revealing yet, this actress told me she cried. How could I say no to her?
Right.
So yes, I would say in the next 2.5 to 3 years, everybody here can go to their local movie theater because it will be open by then, and see Codename Madeleine. Yes.
Certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. Claire, did you want to come back and send off our friend with me?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Arthur. That was really just fascinating. It's a great December story. And yeah, thanks for moderating, Maya.
Absolutely. And I
Thanks
really,
to all the audience.
Right. Yay. Thanks, audience, for showing up on a crazy, crazy, crazy busy, one of the busiest days of the year. And I really can't encourage people to buy the book enough. Arthur honestly barely scratched the surface of everything that is going on in this incredibly dense, in a good way, book. It's so packed with action and details and so many things that I really had no idea about, including the Gandhi discussion that were going on during World War II, and also just the fascinating backstory on Nora's life, which is very, very complex. And Loretta says many thanks to Arthur and all of you,
thank you
for your efforts.
Yeah. Okay, can I jump in one thing?
Yes,
and
then we're cutting you off.
Yeah, it's about time. I'm sure you've been waiting for this moment. Should anybody wish to acquire a self-adhesive book plate autographed by me that you can apply wherever you want in your book, but preferably not over the painstakingly written text, send me an email. I will then send you an autographed book plate. I'll make it out to you, or I'll make it out to Scott's daughter, or anybody. You can reach me at Arthur. What is my email address? amagida2, number 2, not spelled out, 2, amagida2 at AOL.com. You can go through my website and reach me there. It's www.arthurmagida.com. But autographed book plates available to all. Look, no, that's wrong. Magida 2, number 2.
Got it. Well, good. And we'll make sure that we get your email address out to folks as well. So, well, thank you again. And everyone, please take care out there. And let me just, yep, great. And Claire just included Arthur's email address in chat. And all right, well, everybody take care, and let's reach for that light in 2021. So, okay, take care.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.